I suspected my wife was planning a divorce, so I moved my assets. 2 weeks later, Reddit family. As Sarah sat across from me, the weight of her revelation hung in the air. "I've been seeing someone else," she said, her voice steady, almost rehearsed. She slid a stack of documents across the table, divorce papers. Her expression shifted from feigned sorrow to barely concealed relief, as if unshackling herself from our marriage, but she had no idea. I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips. "You know, Sarah, I had a feeling. That's why I moved everything, our savings, the house deed, even the investments, into a trust. For the kids." Her face paled, the confidence draining from her eyes. You can't do that," she stammered. "Actually, I can," I replied, and I did. "The trust is ironclad. You walked away from everything the moment you filed." Her shock turned to fury, but it was too late. I stood, collected my keys, and walked out of the house that was no longer hers. The door clicked shut behind me, a soft, final sound. I had protected my future, and as I stepped into the sunlight, I realized I wasn't the one starting over with nothing. She was. Thank you for sticking with me through this journey. If this story resonated with you, drop A1 in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and share this channel with someone who needs to hear this story. Your support means everything. What do you think? Robert Jenkins had always considered himself a practical man. At 38 years old, he had built a solid life in Denver, Colorado, balancing his job as a construction manager with a comfortable home and a marriage he believed was rooted in love and mutual respect. His wife, Sarah, 35, was a sharp and charismatic marketing executive. They had been married for 5 years, sharing not only a home, but also dreams of a future filled with quiet stability and maybe someday, kids running through their modest backyard. Their circle included Michael, Robert's old college friend and now a successful lawyer. Michael had always been a steady presence in their lives, the kind of friend who could offer both a cold beer and sound legal advice. Then there was Jason, a 33-year-old coworker of Sarah's. He was charming and ambitious, often the life of their occasional dinner parties. Robert had always appreciated how Jason could make Sarah laugh after a long work week. It never crossed his mind that Jason might also be the reason her smile had started to fade when she looked at him. For years, Robert and Sarah had what he thought was a rock-solid marriage. They had their routines, like Sunday morning coffee runs and late-night movie marathons. Their shared humor was one of his favorite things, silly inside jokes and playful banter that only made sense to them. They'd often sit on their porch wrapped in a shared blanket, whispering about dreams of traveling to Europe or finally fixing up the guest room. It felt real, it felt lasting. But looking back, Robert could see how the fabric of their life had started to unravel, thread by delicate thread. He hadn't noticed at first. How could he? The signs were so small. A missed dinner here, a phone call taken outside there. At the time, he told himself it was work stress. Sarah had just been promoted, and her hours had stretched, her responsibilities piled up. He had been proud of her ambition and drive. It wasn't like her to pull away, but everyone goes through tough times. Then, the subtle changes became harder to ignore. Sarah started bringing her phone everywhere. She had always been casual about it, leaving it on the coffee table while they cooked or watched TV. Now she clutched it like a lifeline. When it buzzed, she would smile, a smile Robert hadn't seen in a while, and then excuse herself to the porch. The conversations were always just work calls, she'd say. He wanted to believe her. He really did. The emotional distance followed soon after. Their easy conversations became stilted, like walking on glass. When Robert brought up future plans, where they might go for their anniversary, or whether it was time to start thinking about remodeling the kitchen, Sarah would brush him off. "Yeah, we'll see," she'd say, before changing the subject. It was like trying to hold water in his hands. No matter how tightly he tried to grasp, everything just slipped away. One night, as they sat in their small kitchen, Sarah suggested they organize their finances. "It's just smart, you know," she had said, her voice light but her eyes distant. "We should put everything in one place, you know, just in case of emergencies." The suggestion had landed in his gut like a stone. Sarah had always been independent with money. They each had their own accounts, shared just enough for bills and groceries. He asked what kind of emergencies she meant, and she had only shrugged. "You never know, right? It's better to be prepared." Prepared for what, he had wondered. His mind had swirled with possibilities, none of them good. Still, he didn't want to appear paranoid. He had learned over the years that sometimes questioning too much could build walls where there weren't any. So, he let it go, at least on the surface. Beneath the calm exterior, however, something had begun to shift. Robert found himself paying attention to the details. Where her phone was, how often she mentioned this new friend from work. The way her answers had become just a little too rehearsed. It was like watching a movie he had seen before, one where he already knew the ending but kept hoping for a different twist. It wasn't until a chance encounter at a cafe that the puzzle pieces began to click into place. What he saw that day would change everything, setting him on a path that led straight into the heart of betrayal, but also, eventually, to redemption. The room seemed to shrink around Robert as Sarah sat down across from him, her face an unreadable mask. The evening had started like any other. They were sharing a quiet dinner at home, the kind they used to enjoy when life felt simpler. He had just refilled their wine glasses when she cleared her throat, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of the glass. "I've been cheating on you for 2 years," she said, her voice as steady as if she were commenting on the weather. "I'm leaving you." The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. Robert's hand paused mid-reach, the bottle of Merlot tilting slightly, a thin stream of wine dribbling onto the polished wood of the table. His mind raced, but his body moved on autopilot. He set the bottle down carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile calm in the room. For a moment there was nothing but the soft hum of the refrigerator. Then, with a deliberate slowness, Robert lifted his glass. His hand was steady. He took a measured sip, the bitter warmth of the wine doing nothing to thaw the ice spreading through his chest. He met her gaze, and to his own surprise, he smiled. "Well," he said, his voice even, "I guess that explains a lot." Sarah blinked, her own composure faltering for just a second. She had expected shouting, tears, anything but this. His reaction was as smooth as glass, giving nothing away. Inside, though, a storm was raging. The silence stretched, wrapping around them like a noose. Robert's mind flashed through 1,000 images, each more painful than the last. Late nights at the office, unanswered texts, the faint smell of cologne on a jacket that wasn't his. He had known, of course. Somewhere deep down, he had felt the fracture lines spreading through their life. But knowing and hearing were different things. Inside, he was unraveling. His thoughts spiraled, each darker than the last. The betrayal gnawed at his insides, sharp and relentless. He wanted to shout, to smash the glass against the wall, to demand answers. But he did none of those things. He had learned long ago that control was its own kind of power. If he let his emotions loose now, they would consume him, and Sarah would win. Instead, he forced his breath to steady, each inhale a quiet rebellion against the chaos in his mind. He would not give her the satisfaction of seeing him break. He had spent years building this life, brick by careful brick. If she wanted to tear it down, she would find him unshaken, at least on the surface. He raised his glass again, a toast to the end of everything. "To honesty," he said softly, the edge in his voice as sharp as shattered glass. Sarah hesitated, but then lifted her own glass. Their glasses clinked, a hollow echo in the empty house. It was in that moment, as the wine slid down his throat, that Robert made a choice. She had played her hand, and now it was his turn. But this wasn't a game he planned on losing. The waiter appeared at their table, seamlessly stepping into the charged silence. He poured the wine with practiced elegance, the crimson liquid swirling into crystal glasses. The gentle clink of glass against glass seemed too soft, too ordinary, for a moment that felt like the ground opening beneath Robert's feet. He thanked the waiter with a polite nod, his voice betraying nothing. Sarah, still poised, wrapped her fingers around the stem of her glass, but she didn't drink. Robert took another measured sip, his lips curling slightly as if savoring the taste. In reality, he needed the bitterness of the wine, something sharp to ground him. His mind moved with a precision that surprised even him. Every muscle in his body felt coiled, ready not for an attack, but for something more dangerous. Patience. "So," he said, setting his glass down gently, 2 years, that's quite a long time to keep a secret." His tone was casual, almost conversational. Sarah's eyes darted to his, searching for a sign of the explosion she expected. There was nothing but a calm, glassy surface. "It just happened," she replied, her voice wavering. She had rehearsed this, he realized. She had imagined his rage, his devastation, and perhaps even his begging, but not this. Never this. "Who is he?" he asked, letting the question hang lightly, like asking about the weather. He watched her closely, the way her lips pressed into a thin line, the slight twitch of her fingers against the glass. "Anyone I know?" She hesitated. "It doesn't matter. This isn't about him, it's about us." Robert leaned back, his expression softening just enough to seem genuine. "If it's about us, then I think I deserve a bit more honesty. Don't you?" The words were a carefully set trap, each syllable baited with calm curiosity. He needed to keep her talking, unraveling herself in the web of half-truths. His mind worked behind the scenes, piecing together everything he knew, every late night, every whispered call, every evasive answer. She had laid the groundwork for this conversation, but Robert was already setting the stage for his own endgame. He offered a small, almost sad smile. "We've always been honest with each other, haven't we?" Sarah's shoulders relaxed just a little, a crack in her armor. She thought she was gaining control, that his softness was surrender. She didn't see the door closing behind her, the slow tightening of his grip on the narrative. As she began to speak, filling the room with her carefully constructed story, Robert listened. Every word was a thread, and he was already weaving them into a noose. Robert's mind drifted back to the first tremor of suspicion, a moment that now seemed sharp against the hazy blur of their recent life. It had been a Tuesday afternoon, ordinary in every way, except for the nagging itch at the back of his mind. Sarah had come home late, her explanation neatly wrapped in work jargon. A client dinner ran long. She had smiled as she said it, but the smile never reached her eyes. He had wanted to believe her. God, how he had wanted to. But the story felt brittle, like something that would shatter if he pressed too hard. So he didn't. Instead, he leaned into the doubt, letting it guide him. The next morning, he made a call to an old acquaintance, a private investigator named Mark, who owed him a favor. "I need you to look into something," Robert had said, his voice steady, quietly. From that moment on, every thread of Sarah's story began to unravel. Mark was meticulous, slipping into the shadows of her world without a trace. Over the following weeks, he gathered everything: photos, messages, receipts. Robert received them in neat, unmarked envelopes, each one heavier than the last. There were pictures of Sarah and Jason at a cafe, their heads close together, laughter in the curve of their bodies. Receipts for hotel rooms, the check-in names disguised but not well enough. Text messages with half-hidden promises and brazen lies. "Can't wait to see you tonight." He's clueless, it's almost funny. Robert documented everything. He started taking notes, a small black notebook tucked into his briefcase. He recorded conversations, backing up files in places Sarah would never think to look. He created a map of her betrayal, each point connected by lines of deception that stretched back far longer than he had realized. Every time she told him she was working late, every business trip, every girls' night was cataloged and cross-referenced. He began setting small traps, asking casual questions to see if her answers aligned with the evidence. More often than not, they didn't. The evidence wasn't just a collection of proof, it was his armor. He knew that when the time came, he needed to be ready. Sarah was playing a game, but she didn't realize Robert had already learned the rules. Each piece of evidence was a step forward, a calculated move in a game of chess where Sarah didn't even know she was being played. Sitting across from her now, listening to her well-rehearsed story, Robert felt the weight of that notebook in his mind. It was a comfort, a reminder that while she had been writing her own story, he had been writing a better ending. Robert swirled the wine in his glass, watching the crimson liquid coat the sides like blood on porcelain. His questions started innocently enough, a soft pitch in a casual conversation. "So, how was the conference last month? You know, the one in San Francisco?" Sarah's hand paused mid-air, her fork hovering over the half-eaten plate of pasta. "It was fine," she said, her voice too light. "Mostly meetings, not much time for sightseeing." He nodded slowly, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "That's funny, I ran into Mark Thompson last week. You remember Mark? He mentioned he was at the same conference, said the hotel had the most beautiful view of the bay." A muscle in Sarah's jaw tightened. I didn't see him. It was a big event." Of course, Robert agreed, his tone smooth. I'm sure you were busy. Was Jason there too? I know you mentioned he's been involved in a lot of your projects lately. She froze, the name landing between them like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Her composure wavered, a flicker of something raw and unguarded flashing in her eyes. Jason? No. Why would he be there? Robert just smiled, a slow, deliberate gesture. Just curious. You talk about him a lot. I thought maybe he was more involved in your work than I realized. He excused himself to the bathroom, but instead of running cold water over his face like he wanted to, he pulled out his phone. His fingers moved quickly, typing out a message to Michael, his lawyer, and another to Mark, the private investigator. It's time. Be ready. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, a man who had spent the last few months living a double life of his own. One version of him was the patient, slightly oblivious husband. The other was the man preparing for war. He took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill his lungs, and stepped back into the dining room. Sarah's discomfort was palpable. She had poured herself another glass of wine, her fingers gripping the stem as if it might anchor her. Robert sat down, his movements calm and precise. You know, he said, his voice almost gentle, there's a certain freedom in honesty. It clears the air, takes away the tension. She stared at him, her knuckles white against the glass. What are you talking about? He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. I just think it's better when everything is out in the open, don't you? A sheen of sweat appeared at her hairline, and her smile, so perfectly practiced, began to fray at the edges. Robert said nothing more, letting the silence stretch and twist between them. He had already planted the seeds, and now he just had to watch them grow. The doorbell rang, its soft chime cutting through the taut silence of the room. Sarah's head snapped toward the door, her eyes widening just enough for Robert to notice. He remained seated, swirling the last of his wine in the glass, the deep red liquid spinning slowly, hypnotically. Are we expecting someone? Sarah asked, her voice tight. Robert took a leisurely sip before setting the glass down with a soft clink. I might have invited a friend over. I thought it'd be nice to have some company. Her expression shifted, something between confusion and fear, the kind of look a deer might give just before the hunter pulls the trigger. She didn't move as Robert stood, his steps slow and measured, as if he had all the time in the world. He opened the door, and there stood Jason, looking freshly scrubbed and uncomfortably formal. His expression faltered the moment he saw Robert, a mix of surprise and unease creeping across his face. Hey, Robert, I wasn't sure if... Come on in, Jason, Robert said smoothly, stepping aside. We were just finishing dinner. Jason hesitated, his feet rooted to the welcome mat. Behind Robert, Sarah's breath came shallow and fast, her glass frozen midway to her lips. The glass trembled slightly, and Robert noted the way the wine threatened to spill over the rim. Is everything okay? Jason asked, his voice wobbling as he stepped into the room. Perfectly, Robert said. Sarah and I were just having a chat about honesty, you know, clearing the air. Jason's eyes darted to Sarah, whose face had gone pale. I didn't think you'd be here, Robert. Why not? It's my home, after all, he said, closing the door softly behind Jason. Sit down. You've come this far. No need to stand on ceremony. Sarah set her glass down, the sound of it hitting the table a sharp crack in the stillness. What's going on? She demanded, her voice a brittle edge. Robert moved around the room with a calmness that felt surreal, almost rehearsed. He took his seat again, folding his hands neatly in front of him. I think it's time for a real conversation. You know, the kind where everyone gets to tell their truth. He turned to Jason, his expression welcoming, as if they were simply catching up over coffee. You know, Sarah's been telling me about you. All the late nights at the office, the work trips. She speaks so highly of your dedication. Jason opened his mouth, but no words came. Sarah's hands were flat on the table now, as if she needed to hold on to something solid. You two have been quite the team, Robert continued, his voice a smooth river over jagged rocks. I thought it was only fair to invite you over. After all, if we're talking about honesty, who better to have in the room than the man who's been part of my marriage for the last 2 years? Silence descended, thick and suffocating. Jason's face went ashen, his bravado crumbling under Robert's steady gaze. Sarah's mouth opened and closed, but the words seemed stuck, tangled in her throat. Robert sat back, his smile never faltering. So, shall we begin? Robert leaned back in his chair, his posture deceptively relaxed. His eyes moved slowly between Sarah and Jason, savoring the tension that had settled over the room like a shroud. He reached into the drawer of the sideboard and pulled out a slim, manila envelope. The sound of the flap tearing open was sharp, almost surgical. "I thought we could go through this together," he said, sliding a stack of photographs onto the table. Each image was a shard of truth, capturing moments Sarah and Jason thought were hidden. Them holding hands at a cafe, entering the same hotel room, their silhouettes framed by the dim glow of a city Robert had never visited with his wife. "Recognize these?" His voice was steady, almost gentle. "I've got to admit I'm impressed by how thorough you were, planning the work trips, syncing your schedules. You almost made it believable." Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the photos, her fingers grazing the edges as if they might cut her. "Robert, Save it." His voice cut through her like a blade. "I've been listening to your lies for 2 years. I'm done." He turned to Jason, who sat rigid, his face a mask of panic. "Did she tell you we were having problems? That I didn't understand her? Or maybe she was playing the unhappy wife card? I bet she was pretty convincing." Jason's mouth opened and closed, his confusion giving way to a simmering anger. "You said you were leaving him," he hissed at Sarah. "You told me he was the problem." Sarah's composure shattered. "You promised me we'd be together. You said this was the only way." Her voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. Robert allowed a silence to stretch out, letting the weight of their betrayal hang between them. Then, almost casually, he pulled out a second envelope. "Bank statements," he explained, spreading them out. "Small withdrawals, just enough to fly under the radar. Except I wasn't as clueless as you thought." Sarah's face crumpled. "I needed security. You were never around. You chose your work over me." "I chose to build a life for us," Robert shot back. "You chose to burn it down." Jason stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not doing this. I didn't sign up for this mess." "Sit down," Robert said, his voice like iron. Jason hesitated, the command hanging heavy in the air. He sat. Sarah began to cry, the tears spilling over, each sob a fracture in her carefully constructed facade. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Robert's expression remained unchanged. "The only thing you're sorry for is getting caught." He leaned forward, his face a mask of cold resolve. "You thought you could take everything, the house, my savings, my dignity, but you forgot one thing." "What?" Sarah whispered, her voice small and broken. He smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of his lips. "I was always 3 steps ahead." Robert's movements were deliberate as he slid the final piece of evidence across the table. His collection was meticulous. Photos of secret meetings, printouts of text messages laced with hidden meanings, and hotel receipts bearing their aliases. The images were stark, capturing the quiet intimacy of Sarah and Jason's betrayal. A stolen kiss behind a restaurant, their hands entwined as they walked through a park, the unmistakable shadows of 2 lovers standing too close under a dim streetlight. The text messages were worse. Robert read a few aloud, his voice devoid of emotion. "Can't wait to see you tonight. He won't suspect a thing." His eyes flicked to Jason, who sat frozen, his face drained of color. "Just play along for a little longer. He's clueless." The words hung in the air, the sharp tang of betrayal filling the room. And then the receipts. The cold, hard evidence of their affair. Hotel bookings under fake names, restaurant bills, even a shared Uber ride from the airport. "Quite a partnership," Robert said, his tone mild. "Almost impressive how well you covered your tracks." "Almost." Sarah's lips moved, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted between the evidence and Jason, who now looked like a man sinking in quicksand. "Is this why you brought me here?" Jason's voice was thin, almost childlike. "To humiliate us?" Robert let a silence settle, the kind that gnaws at the edges of sanity. Then he leaned forward, his gaze unyielding. "No, Jason, I brought you here to make sure the truth had witnesses, to ensure neither of you could rewrite this story." He stood, the scrape of his chair echoing like a gavel. "You wanted honesty, Sarah? There it is, raw and unfiltered." His voice remained steady, a river of calm through the chaos. "You can keep your stories, your lies, but the truth?" He gestured to the pile of evidence. "The truth stays with me." He paused at the door, his hand resting lightly on the frame. "You both thought I'd break, that I'd beg or bargain, but I don't need anything from you. Not your excuses, not your apologies." His voice dropped, soft but unshakable. "The only thing I want is my life back, and you're not in it." With that, Robert turned, leaving Sarah and Jason in the wreckage of their choices. The door closed softly behind him, but the echo of his words lingered, a reminder that in the end, the truth always wins. As Robert stepped into the cool evening air, he pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. Mark, the private investigator, answered on the second ring. "It's time," Robert said, his voice steady. "Send everything out. Family, friends, colleagues. Make sure the truth is crystal clear." Mark didn't ask questions. He had the file ready, a digital dossier of photos, messages, and receipts that painted an undeniable picture of betrayal. Within minutes, the emails would start landing in inboxes, the truth unraveling with every notification ping. Sarah's carefully constructed lies would burn under the harsh light of reality. There would be no more hiding, no more pretending. As he hung up, Robert felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. His part was done. The rest would unfold on its own, a cascade of consequences he no longer needed to manage. Back inside, the restaurant had settled into a quiet hum, unaware of the storm that had just passed through. The waiter approached cautiously, his expression a careful blend of professionalism and curiosity. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" Robert reached into his wallet and handed over his credit card. "Just the check, please, and take care of anything at that table as well." He nodded toward Sarah and Jason, who sat motionless, still reeling from the implosion of their secrets. He added a generous tip, a gesture of normalcy in a moment that felt anything but. As he signed the receipt, his hands were steady, his movements deliberate. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and straightened his shoulders. Walking out, he didn't look back. There was no need. The weight he had carried for months had lifted, leaving only the clean, clear path ahead. The door closed softly behind him, a quiet end to a conversation that would echo for a long time. Outside, the world seemed sharper, the colors brighter. He breathed in deeply, savoring the crisp air. With every step, he felt the ground firm beneath him. For the first time in a long while, he knew exactly where he was going. As Robert walked to his car, the weight of the evening began to settle over him. It wasn't the betrayal that cut the deepest. Affairs happened, lies were told, and hearts were broken every day. What gnawed at him, what kept his breath tight in his chest, was the realization of how long he had lived in the shadows of his own life. 2 years. 2 years of whispered phone calls, secret messages, and stolen moments. He had been a stranger in his own marriage, a ghost moving through a world where the truth had been painted over with layers of deception. He had always prided himself on his instincts, on his ability to read people. His work required it, sensing danger, predicting outcomes, building structures with a foundation strong enough to withstand any storm. But at home, in the life he thought he had built on solid ground, he had missed every sign. That was the wound that would take the longest to heal. Inside the restaurant, the contrast was stark. Sarah sat frozen, the reality of her choices crashing over her. She had expected outrage, maybe even an argument, but Robert's composure had been unyielding, his every word a calm, calculated strike. Her shock turned inward, folding into the kind of silence only guilt could bring. Jason fumbled through his confusion, his mind scrambling to keep up. He had been caught in his own web, the thrill of the affair now tangled with the consequences he had not anticipated. His bravado had evaporated, leaving only a man staring at the wreckage of his own making. Robert's phone buzzed with messages, friends responding to the revelations, some with disbelief, others with support. He ignored them, focusing instead on what came next. His lawyer had already started the paperwork. The house, his finances, and most importantly, the well-being of his children were his priorities. He made a note to schedule a meeting with a family therapist, wanting to ensure that his kids had the support they needed to navigate this upheaval. He drafted emails, updating the necessary parties, and began outlining a new budget. His mind shifted into a familiar mode, strategic, practical, unyielding. He had built things from the ground up before, and he would do it again. This time, he would lay every brick himself, knowing exactly what was underneath. As he started his car, a new resolve settled in his bones. His life had been cracked open, but through those cracks, the light was finally getting in. Robert woke the next morning to the gentle hum of the city outside his window. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft patterns on the wall. For the first time in what felt like forever, the light didn't feel harsh or intrusive. It was warm, cleansing. He stretched, feeling the satisfying pull of muscle and bone, the kind of sensation that reminded him he was still here. His focus sharpened, zeroing in on what mattered most: his children and his own well-being. The kids were his anchor. Their routines became his, the simple rhythms of school drop-offs, helping with homework and tucking them in at night. He traded sleepless nights filled with questions for bedtime stories and early morning pancake sessions. Each moment spent with them felt like another brick laid in the foundation of a new life, one built on honesty and stability. He scheduled counseling sessions, wanting to ensure they processed the upheaval in a healthy way. His own healing ran parallel, woven into therapy and quiet moments of reflection. While Robert built his life back up, Sarah's world crumbled. The evidence of her affair spread through their social circles like wildfire. Friends who had once admired her wit and charisma turned cold. Invitations stopped. Messages went unanswered. The carefully curated image she had built of a devoted wife, a dedicated professional, collapsed under the weight of the truth. She moved out of their shared home and into a small apartment across town, her new life starkly different from the one she had envisioned with Jason. Jason fared no better. If he had thought aligning himself with Sarah would bring him status or security, he had miscalculated. The exposure of their affair was not a ripple, but a tidal wave. His own professional reputation took a hit. His company had a strict code of conduct, and the scandal did not sit well with his superiors. If he was married, his home life unraveled as well. Neighbors whispered, friends pulled away, and he found himself just as isolated as Sarah. The spark of excitement that their affair had once brought had turned to ashes, leaving him with nothing but regret. Meanwhile, Robert worked closely with his lawyer Michael, who had been a rock through the storm. They mapped out a clear legal strategy, ensuring that the divorce proceedings prioritized the kids' needs and protected Robert's financial stability. Sarah's attempt to secure alimony fell flat. The evidence of her infidelity played a critical role in court. The judge ruled that Robert would retain primary custody of the children, and Sarah's demands for spousal support were swiftly denied. Instead, the court mandated her to contribute to child support, a sharp twist she had not seen coming. Financially, Robert secured his assets. His foresight in moving funds and protecting his investments paid off. He set up a trust for his children, ensuring their education and well-being were never at risk. He also updated his will, leaving nothing to chance. This wasn't about revenge. It was about building a life that no longer teetered on someone else's lies. As the legal dust settled, Robert found solace in the quiet victories. Each signed document, each finalized decision was a step away from the wreckage and toward a life where he called the shots. He found a rhythm, not just in his responsibilities, but also in rediscovering what made him happy. He picked up old hobbies, reconnected with friends, and even took a weekend trip to the mountains, something he had always wanted to do but never found the time for. Through it all, he remained a constant for his children. He didn't hide the truth from them, but instead approached it with gentle honesty. He showed them that life could throw unexpected challenges, but it was how you met those challenges that defined you. His home became a place of healing, filled with warmth and laughter, the shadows of the past slowly receding. Robert's departure from his old life wasn't a clean break, but a careful, calculated move toward freedom. He hadn't just survived Sarah's betrayal, he had transformed because of it, and as the door closed on that chapter, he knew the story ahead was his to write. In the months that followed, Robert found himself drawn to the things he had set aside for years. He dusted off his old guitar, the one that had sat untouched in the corner of his closet, strings loose and silent. Music had always been a refuge, and he found comfort in the familiar chords, each strum a reminder that his hands could still create something beautiful. He also discovered a love for woodworking, a craft that let him shape raw, unyielding material into something purposeful. He started small, building a bookshelf for the living room. Then, as his confidence grew, he crafted a treehouse in the backyard. His kids watched the progress with wide-eyed excitement, offering to hand him tools and paint the walls. The project became more than just wood and nails. It was a symbol of rebuilding, a space for new memories. Robert also reconnected with old friends. He accepted invitations to barbecues and game nights, laughter slowly finding its way back into his life. These moments became a reminder that not everything had been lost. His world had shifted, but not all of it had crumbled. There were still pieces worth holding on to. At home, Robert focused on creating a sense of stability for his children. He learned to braid his daughter's hair, each twist a quiet act of love. He built Lego fortresses with his son, letting their imaginations take over the living room. He started a new tradition of Saturday morning pancakes, each breakfast served with a side of silly stories and syrupy smiles. He understood that his kids needed more than just structure. They needed to feel safe, to know that even as things changed, his love for them remained unwavering. He enrolled them in counseling, offering them a space to express the complicated emotions swirling in their young minds. He was there for every session, waiting outside with open arms and open ears. Their home transformed into a haven. The walls that had once held secrets were now covered in crayon drawings and family photos. Laughter filled the spaces that silence had haunted. Every bedtime story, every whispered "I love you," was a brick in the foundation of the new life he was building, not just for himself, but for them. Robert realized that healing wasn't just about moving forward, it was also about showing his children how to find light in the dark, teaching them that while life could be unpredictable, love and safety would always be constants under his roof. As the seasons changed, so did Robert's world. What had once felt like an endless winter of betrayal slowly gave way to the warmth of new beginnings. He found himself drawn to the local community center, where he had signed up for a woodworking class. It was there that he met Emily. She was a teacher with a laugh that seemed to brighten every room and a kindness that wrapped around him like a soft blanket. Their friendship started naturally, shared cups of coffee after class, long conversations about books and music, and the easy companionship of two people who had seen enough of life to appreciate the small things. Emily had her own story of a marriage that hadn't worked out, and they found solace in each other's honesty. There was no rush, no pressure, just the slow, steady rhythm of trust being rebuilt, one conversation at a time. Robert wasn't sure if it would become something more, but he liked the way his heart felt when he was around her. Unrushed, steady, open. It was a feeling he hadn't realized he missed. His kids adored her, and he watched with a quiet joy as they laughed together, a new layer of warmth settling over their home. Through everything, Robert had learned more about life than he ever expected. He learned that trust was not just a gift but a responsibility, something to be given carefully and cherished deeply. He understood now that betrayal said more about the betrayer than the betrayed, and that holding on to anger only served to anchor him to a past he no longer lived in. Most importantly, he learned that strength wasn't just about enduring hardship, but about choosing to rebuild with grace. He had faced the wreckage of his old life, sifted through the ruins, and decided to create something better. He had found a balance between protecting his heart and keeping it open, showing his children that resilience didn't mean shutting the world out, but finding the courage to let light back in. With every step forward, Robert chose healing over hurt, growth over grief. His life was no longer defined by what he had lost, but by what he had built, something real, honest, and full of promise. Robert found strength in setting his sights on the future. His career, once just a means to support his family, became a source of pride and purpose. He took on new projects at work, leading a team to renovate a historic building downtown. The project was a perfect metaphor for his own life, taking something worn and turning it into something vibrant and full of life. His passion didn't go unnoticed, and soon he was offered a promotion. It wasn't just about the title or the paycheck. It was about proving to himself that he could build something meaningful from the ground up. At home, he created a list of personal goals. He signed up for a 10K charity run, started volunteering at his children's school, and even learned to cook a few signature dishes that became fast family favorites. Each small victory added to the momentum of his new life, showing his kids through actions, not just words, that moving forward was possible. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees in their backyard, Robert sat on the porch with a mug of tea. The air was cool, the sky painted in soft hues of orange and purple. His children's laughter drifted through the open window, blending with a gentle rustle of leaves. For the first time in a long while, his mind was quiet. He closed his eyes, breathing in the moment. The chaos of that fateful dinner, the crushing weight of betrayal, and the uncertainty that had followed, it all felt like a story from another lifetime. What remained was a sense of peace, a quiet strength that came not from winning some battle against his past, but from finding harmony with the present. He had not just survived, he had grown. And it was this growth, this newfound resilience, that painted his world with hope. As the years passed, Robert often found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this place of quiet contentment. What had once been a tangled mess of betrayal and heartbreak was now a tapestry of strength and resilience. He no longer looked back with anger. Those sharp edges had worn down over time. Instead, he felt a deep gratitude for the lessons he had learned and the person he had become. He had faced some of his darkest days, but he had also found light in places he never thought to look. There was pride in that, a kind of earned wisdom that only came from surviving the unimaginable. Through everything, he had discovered that closure wasn't about forgetting the past but finding peace with it. He had learned that the hardest battles were not fought with others but within himself, against doubt, fear, and the temptation to let pain define him. Instead of being hardened by his experiences, he chose to grow softer, kinder, and more present. He became a better father, a truer friend, and most importantly, a man who could look in the mirror and respect the person staring back. Robert hoped his story might resonate with others walking through their own storms. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal, he would say, know that it doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning, the moment you start writing a life that is truly yours. He encouraged those around him to embrace their pain, to sit with it, but not to unpack and live there. Healing, he realized, wasn't a destination but a journey, one that might take time but was always worth the effort. His vision for the future was bright, his home was filled with love and laughter, a testament to the healing power of time and intention. His children thrived, their smiles a reflection of the stability and warmth he had worked so hard to create. His relationship with Emily deepened, a partnership built on transparency and genuine affection. Together, they planned small adventures, a hike on a new trail, a weekend at the lake, quiet nights filled with good food and open conversation. There were no grand gestures or dramatic changes, just a life built with intention and love. In those quiet moments, Robert felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had learned to trust again, not just others but also himself. His choices, his instincts, things he had once doubted, were now the foundation of a life he was proud to live. He had rebuilt his world piece by piece, each act of courage a brick in the new walls of his life. And those walls were strong, not because they kept things out, but because they held everything important within. If his past had taught him anything, it was this. Sometimes, the hardest endings led to the best beginnings. When the world as you know it falls apart, you have the rare opportunity to rebuild it better, stronger, truer. And when you finally step out of the shadows, the sunlight feels like a promise that every step forward is a victory. Robert's story was not about a marriage that ended, but about a life that began. It was proof that redemption was possible, not in getting back what was lost, but in discovering what was still there, what had always been there, waiting for the chance to shine. And in that truth, he found not just closure, but a new chapter, one he would write with hope and an open heart.